Alright, what's up guys? I'm back with another video, and I wanted to really challenge myself to make a video about certain tenets of presuppositional apologetics, Christian apologetics, that is. Because I have been listening to apologists debate for a long time. Recently I've been listening to it, and one thing I realized is when it comes to sorry, I'm trying to get my nicotine back open. When it comes to presuppositional apologetics is can be a very philosophy heavy, theology heavy, technical way of doing apologetics, and you're learning a system of reasoning through presuppositional apologetics. You're not just learning about a bunch of discrete facts and trying to argue the viability of the Christian faith based upon those facts. For example, Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at once after his resurrection. This is strong evidence and testimony and witness to his resurrection, and therefore, on account of those facts, you ought believe in Christ. That's a strong argument based upon evidence, and that would be the kind of evidentialist school of apologetics. And not saying that for a presupper that you don't rely or use or relate to evidences at all. The reality is, when it comes to presuppositional apologetics, the core of it is assessing presuppositions and that make up someone's worldview, and those presuppositions usually they're more fundamental beliefs about nature, about the world, and those presuppositions usually ground all of their other beliefs. And so, for example, if someone is checking the radar and they see that it's supposed to rain tonight, they presuppose that the instruments that are used in order to make these predictions, these weather predictions, are reliable. And so there's a host of presuppositions that they're affirming unconsciously just by believing that it will rain tonight at 6 p.m. in Cincinnati, Ohio, for example. They are, again, believing the reliability of testing, being able to test the weather, being able to check barometers or whatever instruments that read and measure the weather. They believe that reality and nature is uniform in order for it to be testable, in order for it to have some relative level of uniformity and control such that I can predict how it will evolve in the future, or what will happen in the future because of what has happened in the past. This is I guess you could say, the principle of induction in science, that the future will be like the past. And so that is the bedrock of the scientific method. If the future is going to be like the past in some fundamental way, then I can make experiments now that can help me understand what the future will entail, right? That there's something in reality, something that constitutes reality that makes it unchanging, and predictable. Namely, we have the laws of physics and the laws of logic and mathematics that if we apply those things now, we are able to make predictions of what will occur in the future if those variables are met, right? So the laws are the static thing that that allow us to understand what's possible in our world. We know that the law of gravity is always going to apply. It might manifest in different ways, but at the end of the day, gravity will still be a thing. Gravity will still be harnessing objects to a center mass, and that will create a interdependent relationship with other objects around it, so on and so forth. So the reality is, when it comes to presuppositional apologetics, we're trying to understand the preconditions for those presuppositions, right? So if I presuppose that the future will be like the past, the law of induction, or the principle of induction rather, there are certain assumptions that I'm holding to about reality from the get-go that are either warranted or unwarranted. So I have this notion that reality is consistent. I have this notion that reality is moving forward in time. I have this notion that there are definite events that occur within time. Things happen in reality. Reality is a form of experience and activity of objects, right? Those objects have difference in ontology. A car is different from a human being, right? So within reality exist different objects who have different ontologies, different essences. And so from that, I'm already assuming the law of identity, that A is A and not A, right? So a thing is what a thing is. And a thing is contrasted against another thing, right? So what makes a thing is what it is, and how it's not what it isn't, if that makes sense. Kind of confusing, but so we're trying to figure out what world we live in and what worldview makes sense of that world, right? What philosophy of life makes sense of the world that we see, and based upon the worldview we select, we either have strong or weak justification for why that worldview is the case. And so, does the Christian paradigm of reality explain the many parts of reality without disunifying all of those parts of reality? Does the Christian claim from top-down consideration tether all of the disparate facts of reality into a cohesive whole, a narrative, right? What are these facts moving towards? Is there any reason behind them? And if you have no revealing personal God, as you do in the Trinity, then you have no meaningful fact of experience. You have a ultimately spontaneously generated fact that has no relationship to any other fact, because all facts under this paradigm are all erratically generated, spontaneously generated, and they have no ultimate meaning or significance, which includes the way you relate to those facts, which includes yourself, because you exist, which is a fact of experience. And so by virtue of that, therefore, you also are randomly generated, and have no way to relate with other facts of experience, namely other people. You have no real way to say that there is any unifying bridge between you and your siblings or your friends or humanity as a whole, and you have really no way to unify yourself amongst the many other human beings that exist. You're just a ultimately discrete thing, an ultimate individual who really has no connection to other human beings whatsoever at all. And that doesn't make any sense. So that's why, right, when we're critiquing worldviews, and I'm talking about this at a very fundamental level because I've been studying precept for a decent amount of time now, but I'm trying to like force myself to make more videos to articulate it more, because the more you articulate something, the more you understand it. I really do believe that. So what was I saying? I lost my train of thought before I diverted into that little bruh. Come on, buddy. Yeah, well, I'm getting over it. Sorry about it. I was saying that we're always judging claims against worldviews. We're always judging claims people make, even ourselves, against the backdrop of worldview they propose or they represent or believe, allegedly. And you will find in yourself, I found it in myself even before I even found it in other people, that there is a tension, that epistemic tension that lives within every individual. And the question is, what is the tension? The tension is what I claim to believe is true with my mouth and the worldview that I hold to. So on the one hand, I would say the world is rational, it makes sense, it's consistent, but in practice, I don't live as though that's the case. Right? So I say I have a worldview that accounts for rationality on the one hand, namely science worldview, right? For example. However, I say the origin of the universe came from nothing. It was a gigantic cosmic accident, or a gigantic cosmic eruption, or randomly generated is a better, more apt way of saying it. Randomly generated event, right? So we should also expect randomly generated events even today if that's the case, but we don't see that. It makes no sense. So those are two incompatible claims. On the one hand, we're claiming rationality. Sorry, there's a dude on this bridge going crazy. On the other hand, when we actually articulate our worldview into different areas of life, scientific method for the naturalist, so on and so forth, then you start realizing that every one of their claims after the fact doesn't make sense. It's a rational, irrational cancel out. In effect, it's like it doesn't really comport, right? Or another example of this is to say, let's say for Islam, that would hold to God being personal in some fashion, or God being, what would you say? Being personal, but not being a community in and of himself, right? So God in Islam, the God of Islam, is an ultimate, absolute, monistic entity that is ultimately unified, allegedly, in himself, even though there's no complexity and or what's the word? Diversity in Allah. There you have Allah, absolutely, and that's it. You don't really have any particulars. They could probably maybe point to certain attributes, so on and so forth. I'm not very knowledgeable on that, but I know that they would probably do something to that effect. But I do know that Allah is not triune. And so fundamentally, there's an aspect of reality that has an attribute that God doesn't, namely that people exist in a community and are communal. God, or Allah, doesn't have community even within himself. And so on the one hand, you have a claim that Islam would make, potentially. I'm not saying that they actually do. I think they probably would, right? That God is personal in some sense. He reveals himself. They still believe in a revealing God. However, that's consistent or not is disputable. Because also Allah is very inconsistent in himself, but regardless. So he's actually revealing himself in a variety of ways that are ultimately ununified and they're not intelligible, which is kind of destructive for a person. Deconstructive, whatever. For a person who is revealing themselves, to reveal themselves inconsistently, right, would be very jarring for any person that is in relationship with that other person. And so we don't have that in the triune God of Scripture, the ontological Trinity, as Cornelius Van Til would refer to God as. We don't have that where God is inconsistently revealing himself. We have God consistently revealing himself from all eternity, or from creation, rather, sorry. And consistently and progressively, we still say that God progressively reveals himself, but in every iteration of God's revelation, in progressive revelation, in no way, shape, or form is God confusing people or revealing himself in one way at one moment and in a essentially different way at another moment. That seems like that's the work of Satan. Satan is the one who masquerades himself as an angel of light. So that's a what do you want to say? It's just a illegitimate, inconsistent form of revealing yourself. So again, my point is, people represent worldviews that they hold to, they believe, and they'll either have strong or weak or no justifications for those worldviews at all. They can claim that their worldview grants them rationality, ethics, but on their own merits, when you actually ask them how it does that, you point to particular examples or things within their system of thought, like, tell me about abortion, tell me about politics, tell me about this or that, just different parts of their system of thought, and you get into different zones and you see how their worldview accounts for those questions. And people, this is a very uncomfortable thing to do. It's uncomfortable to experience because most people don't really think about whether or not their worldview, the philosophy they hold to, really gives them the things that they want to have as a human being. They want to have rationality because they know they have a mind and a brain that works to understand what's happening around them. They want to have ethics because they know that people have some definite sense of value and dignity. But the task of man is always to bring those things in unity. The task of man has always been that ever since he fell in the garden. And and you see this task play out in unbelieving systems where the way to solve that dilemma, the dilemma of how do I make sense of the world I live in given I have rationality, ethics, so on, aesthetics, so on and so forth. How do I make sense of that world? Ever since man fell in the garden and gave up thinking God's thoughts after him, is what Van Til would say, basically submitting to what God thinks about what he made. God made the reality the way it is, based on his desire and his decree, and it's good. And for us to be consistent in our reasoning, we should think about what he made according to what it is. So if God made a man and all the features of manhood, then we should worship God for his good design and how he made man. Likewise, if God makes woman, we should honor God and worship him and actually serve the item of creation, woman, item of creation, man, whatever you want to call it, the way God intended by defining what it is appropriately, right? It's kind of assumed that if you misdefine something, that your engagement with it is going to be inappropriate. You're going to use it falsely. If I call a hot iron, I don't know, something to pet my dog with, it's like, that could be very dangerous. What if it's on, right? This is actually meant to get hot, so I could burn my dog. But this is not a fit object for petting him with, or her with, whatever. So you get my point. So the issue is, this has been man's dilemma ever since the fall, and man has never been able to unify himself again. He's never been able to. This is the way that rationality and ethics, worldview analysis, has broken down because of the fall. Because we saw God not fit to interpret reality for us, even though he made everything. So it's like, wouldn't he be the most fit person to say what a thing is if he made it himself? I would think. Because we saw him not fit, and we saw ourselves more ideal, with a desire to just be free. That was our first issue. We're just like, hey, bro, I know God made all this. I know he's in control. I know he's good. I don't care. I just want to be free to interpret it the way I want to. And when we opt out for God's revelation and his interpretive power to call something what it is based upon the way he designed it for its good end, its telos, its intention, we destroy the thing always in question. Everything that we redefine, not in the way God defined it, we destroy it. We destroy it. We take it out of context. We use it in any way that we want to. A woman can be a man based upon their own presentation. Whatever you desire to be in that moment is what ultimately determines what you want to be. But we know our world doesn't make sense if that's the case. I can't just become a president right now. I can't just have the power to fly. I can't. My nature binds me to probable activities I can carry out. Some things I can do, some things I can't. I can't will myself to have a vagina. Truly, right? That it's a nonsensical thought if held actually. It makes no sense. But we will adopt those positions and those worldviews because we are sinning against God in our minds. That's what we're doing. It's man's way of trying to unify disparate parts of reality according to his own likeness, according to his own desire, and he will stop at nothing in order to make that happen. He doesn't care if a man is a man. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if the world is God's world and he's living in it. He doesn't care. This is a perilous condition, right? This is necessary for Christ to save us from. Some people think that, like, just rationality, your mind, that's underplayed. That stuff doesn't matter that much. Like, you know, it's about the spiritual realm. Is that not a spiritual condition? Using your mind to say that you are the final arbiter of what exists, right? That's a spiritual issue, a spiritual flaw. So, I don't know. This was just a basic, conversation. And then I'll probably hopefully get into more complexity. I mean, I want to, just for people to understand the Christian presuppositional position and how powerful it is. So, yeah, peace.